Hi, and welcome to the New Bedford Cable Network. Jim Marshall here, and following the election results of 2012 on November 6th, we're going to talk with three-time Governor of Massachusetts, Mike Dukakis, the Democratic presidential nominee in 1988, about the results, his thoughts, what he thinks. Governor, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it. Talk to me about, I guess, your just initial reactions overall about the results yesterday.
I was surprised, not about Elizabeth Warren. I expected her to win. I thought she'd win by 8 to 10 points, and she won by 8 points. Now, I know that differed with some of those last-minute polls. Frankly, I think the Globe and the Herald ought to get themselves new pollsters or maybe just stop polling. I'm not quite sure I understand the importance of these things, but because what's going to happen is going to happen. But they were way off, and I thought they were way off. Primarily because Elizabeth had one of the best grassroots organizations I've ever seen. I mean, I had some great ones, and hers was every bit the match of mine. And there was just no question if you were out there. And Kitty and I have been out there weekends for her since the early summer, meeting with canvassing teams, giving them a pep talk, going out and knocking on doors with them, and that kind of stuff. And you could just see the energy and the organization growing and getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And I didn't have the sense that Brown had a field operation, any kind to speak of. I mean, I didn't see anybody knocking on doors for Brown or any of this kind of stuff. So I thought we'd be fine. I was somewhat apprehensive about the president, I got to tell you. You know, we all know, he knows that he didn't do well in the first debate, and that seemed to give Romney a chance to get back into the game. And to the extent that, you know, we're all watching these foolish polls, it was very, very close, and in some cases, down in Florida, he was down in a number of other places. But it was a remarkable victory. And here again, I think the key ingredient was the Obama field operation. It was vastly superior to the Romney operation, vastly superior.
What, when you look at going into Election Day yesterday, I mean, it was so divisive. It just seemed, that's all everybody said. It's just, we are so divisive, right, and, right. You know, can anybody, I mean, there was so much talk about it being tied in the Electoral College. In your travels, do you find that's the case? Are we as divisive as people say we are?
Well, I think the answer is no. If you go back to the beginning of the Republic in 1789, the rhetoric is unbelievable. And by the way, the press made no pretense of being objective. They were highly partisan newspapers at the time. Was there anything more divisive than the Civil War? I mean, are you kidding me? This is nothing. I mean, the country almost broke in two over the issue of slavery. So, you know, prohibition. There's a new book called Last Call, which is the history of prohibition. None of us remember that. We certainly don't even think about it. I talk about a divisive issue. I mean, it was unbelievable. You were either dry or wet. And whole political careers were destroyed depending on where you were coming from. And finally, we took the ultimate step of doing what? Basically, making liquor illegal. And the disastrous social experiment that took place as a result of that. It's all part of American history. If you want to read some unbelievable editorials, see if you can find Wall Street Journal editorials about Franklin Delano Roosevelt. I mean, they're wild. He's a traitor to his class. He's this, he's that, the other thing. And by the way, he gave it back, all 10 barrels. So these historic periods. Personally, I think now that the election's over and the president has won, I think you'll see a damping down of all the rhetoric and a real opportunity to, and a real effort to try to resolve these fiscal and
I guess that's the million-dollar question. You've got, you know, Elizabeth Warren going into the Senate. You've got the president. He's still a Republican-led Congress, and you know, people are asking the question today on the radio: what has changed since yesterday?
We have a president who's been elected, and that's important. And in this case, the incumbent president. So that to the extent that a great deal of the opposition was coming from Tea Party folks in the House of Representatives, I think you're going to see that diminish somewhat. I'm not expecting people to change their stripes politically, but...
Well, even Governor Romney, it seems, toward the end, was obviously becoming more to the middle.
Well, but I think that was just politics. I mean, That was just Etch-a-Sketch. We heard about that from his guy Fernstrom well in advance. I don't think it was serious. But nevertheless, look, people know that we've got to come to grips with this thing, and I think there will be a real opportunity to do so.
What would you say to the president? I mean, if you had the opportunity, I mean, he's got to work together.
I'd sit down with the opposition. The question is, what are they prepared to do for and with him? Remember, Mitch McConnell's the guy that said his most important goal was making Barack Obama a one-term president. And John Boehner reneged on a deal he had with the president to solve this budgetary situation. Well, he says now that, you know, things happened in the administration and stuff, but there isn't any question that he was trying to do it. He just couldn't control his own membership. Well, election's over, and I think both parties are going to have to spend some time thinking about what happens next. But the party that's got to really think what happens next is the Republican Party. Needless to say, I mean, this was a bad day for them. And in some cases, they lost crucial Senate seats because a Tea Party candidate beat a more thoughtful, moderate Republican, and they blew the seat.
One of the things I thought was interesting about election night was the fact that those key races, they all seemed to break for the president's way. And it was interesting going in that, you know, maybe split. I mean, what did that tell you?
All about the field organization. You know, he never dissolved his field organization after 2008, and we know how well it performed in 2008. So Obama for America, OFA, continued. In Ohio, for example, I think the president had 140 field officers. Romney had maybe 30. Those numbers may not be entirely accurate, but it was something like this. And they had been working on this for a long time. And, you know, it's true, I'm obsessed with the importance of grassroots organizing, but it's true. And Elizabeth Warren would not be our new United States Senator-elect today if it hadn't been for her field operation.
Nationally, why do you think the race was as close as it was? Why did nobody seemed to break away?
Anytime you have a soft economy, the incumbent's in trouble. I don't care whether it's the president or governors. And it really doesn't make any difference whether that person is conservative or liberal. When the economy's in trouble, people are concerned. Now, the economy is improving slowly, nowhere near as fast as most of us would like, including the president, but it's still soft, 7.9% unemployment. It's not satisfactory. When that happens and people are hurting, don't be surprised when the incumbent gets hurt.
So from your take, what put him over the top? How was he able to, in this soft economy when times are tough, what was his magic formula?
I think a number of things. First, and you heard this repeatedly toward the end, I say what I think, and I think about what I say, or words to that effect, or I believe what I say. In rather sharp contrast to Romney, who was kind of roping all over the place. I think the economy has improved somewhat, and people were beginning to feel that, at least in certain parts of the country. I think some of the more extreme positions that Romney and Ryan took, especially about Medicare, did not go down right. And finally, likability is an issue. There's no question about it. And I think most people like the president. At least they think he's working hard, trying his best to solve problems. And it isn't that Romney isn't likable, but it was all this backing and filling and bouncing around and stuff, I think, raised serious questions in a lot of people's minds.
Senator Warren's race. 2 years ago when Senator Brown won, obviously wrote a tremendous wave of support.
Right.
What changed?
First, our candidate had lots of time to organize. Martha Coakley did not have that. And in fairness to her, most of us assumed whoever wins the Democratic primary is going to succeed Ted Kennedy. And she herself had never been involved in a statewide campaign, but in a serious statewide campaign. She had won, but it was her first try at statewide office. She didn't have a very strong opponent. She won pretty easily. If you're going to put this kind of a field operation together, it takes time. I mean, you got to start at least a year in advance. At least a year in advance. It's long, but you got to spend some time. There was no such time during the special election. Turns out we had a great candidate. You know, she had her problems at the beginning, but for somebody who had never run for political office, she was a pretty remarkable candidate by the time we get into the fall. And she is. And she's a listener and a learner. She's interested in what you're saying. She learns from that. That's why she put together this grassroots effort. And I think these are some of the reasons why she did so well.
Democrats winning the House in Massachusetts, all the Democrats winning. Obviously, you've got people on the other side saying, well, it's a one-party state, that doesn't help. It'd be nice to have moderate people. Your response to that?
Well, I don't know where the moderates have gone in the Republican Party. That's my concern. I work with some terrific Republicans. People like Elliot Richardson, Frank Hatch, Ollie Ames. I mean, these were thoughtful, reasonable folks. We shared a common set of values. Yeah, maybe we differed somewhat on details, but there was a basic understanding there. And both the Republicans and people like me knew and believed that government has an important role to play in certain areas. I mean, who's going to build your infrastructure anyway? Who's going to educate our kids? I mean, who's going to control environmental pollution? I mean, that's a role that government has to play. And at times, particularly when it came to integrity, because I walked in the legislature at a time when the state was one of the 3 or 4 most corrupt states in the country. Lots of support on the Republican side for that. All of those folks have gone. They're either Democrats or they left the Republican Party. And I think that's an unfortunate thing. When Mike Castle was defeated for the Republican nomination for the United States Senate in Delaware, that was a milestone. That was a watershed. I served with Castle, knew him well as governor. No more decent, thoughtful, moderate politically guy, beaten by this gal who believed in witchcraft or something. And now Delaware's got another Democratic senator.
Do you see those thoughtful, I'm not talking just Democrat or Republican, do you see thoughtful people running for office?
Yes.
Are there enough of them?
Yes. I mean, you know, the people that run for office these days are quite good. They're a lot better than we were. I'm serious. I mean, they're better educated, they're more thoughtful, they're running because they're interested in particular issues. No, I'm a big fan of folks who run for office these days, especially in the state. But, you know, this is a relatively moderate country. It doesn't buy the extremes of right or left. And, you know, you've got a Tea Party group now in the Republican Party that's really pretty extreme. We'll see what happens. Maybe they'll be a little more flexible when it comes to the situation now that the president's been reelected.
Do you see the country, do you see the people in the South, and I keep thinking of what Trent Lott said about Senator Kennedy, you know, when he first was elected, his goal was to ruin Ted Kennedy, and then he got to work with him and pass legislation. He said he's a great guy. Do you see the senators, congressmen from Alabama, Mississippi, the South, the traditional Republican states, working with the people from Massachusetts, California?
I think you got to reach out to these folks. Let me give you a quick example. Healthcare. Now, that's become a very divisive issue. And yet, 90% of the people that don't have health insurance in this country or have lousy health insurance are working or members of working families. They're not loafing. They're not sitting around. They're working Americans. Now, I don't think my party said that enough. It's all about pre-existing conditions and keeping your kids on the policy until you're 26. Nice ideas, but this is fundamental. Are working Americans and their families going to have decent, affordable health care? If you went out and took a poll tomorrow and asked that question to the American people, 93% would say yes. Which tells me that folks in Alabama, for example, believe working Americans should have decent, affordable health care every much as folks in Massachusetts. Well, okay, armed with that information, what do you do if you're in the Senate? You go and see the guy from Alabama. Because I don't know of too many people in the United States that think it's a good thing that we have millions and millions of Americans without health insurance, who, by the way, are ending up in the emergency room and we're paying 10 times for their care what would it cost us if they went and saw a doc. And it seems to me that's what you got to be looking for. And I would ask the guy from Alabama, okay, how do you think we ought to If we can't, if you don't like our approach, how do you think we ought to provide decent, affordable health care for these folks?
Do both parties have to give a little?
Yeah. Sure, sure, sure. But, you know, that brings with it some interesting questions. For example, I'm not for voucherizing Medicare. I think it's a terrible mistake. I think privatizing Medicare is a terrible mistake. We tried it with these Medicare Advantage programs. It was costing us billions. So there are some things on which it's very difficult to compromise, but getting to know people, getting on a first name basis with them, sitting down with them, having reasonable discussions, I mean, that's part of the job of being a public official.
What about big government? You mentioned before about, for example, in the storms, and it's funny, the one thing I learned working in government is nobody likes government until they need it.
Absolutely.
And when they need it, they want it, and they want it all.
I'm with you. I'm with you.
So how, when you hear the criticism, we want to cut big government.
Yeah.
What does that mean? What does that mean?
Well, my response is, you mean when Hurricane Sandy hit us, you want to cut government? Is that what you want to do? You don't think we ought to educate our kids? You don't think that's important? You think it's a good thing that millions and millions of Americans have no affordable health care and are ending up in the emergency room, which is costing us billions? These are things that we expect government to do effectively, efficiently, but we expect them to do. I mean, the private sector is not going to build our infrastructure for us, right? We need roads, bridges, a first-class rail system, which includes rail to the South Coast at long last, the most important single thing we could do to build the economy of southeastern Massachusetts, without a doubt. Just 17 miles of an existing rail line converted to passenger service. I mean, the single most important thing we can do to help the economy of the South Coast and create jobs and a great future for people is to get that rail line moving down there. And what are we talking about? An existing rail line. We're told it's going to cost $1.6 billion. What are they going to pave it with platinum? I mean, what is this? This is simply converting an existing freight line, which, as you know, carries freight for passenger service. What is so difficult about this? And why can't we get on with it, particularly at a time when the cost of money is practically zero? We've got lots of construction people on the street looking for work and contractors who are hungry and are bidding low. What's slowing us down here? I don't understand it. Maybe I'm getting more impatient as I get older. But this is the kind of stuff that we ought to be doing. Who's going to do that? The private sector by itself doesn't do that. This is something we expect of government, and rightly so. So I think when you, instead of get off the rhetoric and let's talk about real issues. And Sandy is a prime example of why, when people need government, they want it now, they want it efficiently, they want it effectively, and I think we've got to remind them of that.
Two questions for you. One, as you look at New Bedford, and what do you see for New Bedford? And
look, I'm a huge fan of New Bedford, as you know, and of the South Coast generally. I'd like to think I was at least one of the governors who really cared about the southeastern part of the state. I think we have a governor today who cares about the southeastern part of the state. We have had governors who didn't care about the southeastern part of the state. I don't know how many times Mitt Romney got down there, but I remember when I was out of office, I was visiting the South Coast more often than he was, and he was governor. So you got to have a commitment, but I think the area is terrific. I love history, and New Bedford is loaded with great history. A quality of life, a coastline. I mean, it's got everything, but it really hasn't been something that people have focused on. And again, I'd like to think when I was governor, we focused on it. And here we've got this project, which is just sitting there, which I don't think is complicated, which would have a huge impact for the better on New Bedford and southeastern Massachusetts. And I say, let's get on with it.
last thing for you, as you look at the country right now, how do you see the next 4 years?
I think they're going to be a good 4 years. They're going to be difficult. You know, the House is still going to be a problem for the president, but I think we're coming back. You know, the Europeans think we're doing great, but we don't have a president that's trying to impose an EU-type solution on our economy. That's what the Romney-Ryan economic plan was all about. And I'd like to think with his leadership and lots of goodwill, and I think he has lots of goodwill. People want him to succeed. They want the country to succeed. I think we can have an excellent 4 years. Remember, Bill Clinton's first 4 years were very rocky. Remember, the Republicans threatened to shut down the government, and he was struggling, and all this stuff. By the time it was over, we'd had 23 million new jobs, full employment, 2 back-to-back budgetary surpluses for the first time in half a century. I think Barack Obama is capable of providing that kind of leadership again for us.
Governor, thank you for your time. We appreciate it.